Welcome to this Real Python course. It's a Python Basics Exercises course that deals with file system operations. Python Basics Exercises courses are about doing some practical training of writing code and training concepts that you've learned in an associated course. And I'm going to be writing out those tasks and exercises and solving them while also talking you over what I'm doing and why I'm doing it in a certain way. There's a bit of background for this, so I suggest that you watch the Python Basics File System Operations course. That is the associated course to these exercises. And if you went through that course, then you should be well equipped to solve these exercises. You will learn how to create files and folders, look up contents of a folder, search for files and folders, and also move and delete files and folders. And this is just what these exercises in this exercises course are about as well. There's a tiny other bit of background for this course, which is that I will be using IDLE, the integrated development and learning environment that comes with Python. If you've gone through the Python Basics courses, then you're already familiar with the tool. If not, then you can check it out in these associated courses. But if you're just here to train, you can also just use any Python interpreter or your favorite text editor and solve the exercises using those tools. We're not going to use any special features of IDLE, so you should be able to tackle it with any sort of text editor. Okay, and that's all about the intro and setup. And if you're ready to do some hands-on programming, then see you in the next lesson where I'm going to introduce the exercises to get you warmed up. Here's the first part of the exercises that you're going to tackle. This is a bit of a warm-up session for you. I will want you to create a new directory in your home folder and call it my folder. Then inside of that folder, you should create 3 files, file1.txt, file2.txt, and image1.png. Next, I will want you to move the image1.png file to a new directory that you'll call images, and that should be inside of your my folder directory. Then you should delete file1.txt, and finally, also delete the my folder directory. At the end of this little drill, you'll be back to base 1, basically. And I encourage you to go through all of these tasks now. Pause this video and just open up your text editor or your Python interpreter and then just try solving these 5 tasks using Python's pathlib module. The best way to train your programming skills is to actually program yourself, type it out, and drill it in. Do things over again. This is how you're going to learn to use the tools. And if you're done, if you went through it yourself, then you can move on to the next lesson where I will be solving the exercises, and then you can see how I'm going to approach this. All right, good luck. Roll up your sleeves and tackle these exercises. See you in the next lesson. Here I am in my Python REPL. I'm using IDLE and I'm ready to tackle the first task. So the first task was I should create a new directory in my home folder that's called my folder. And before I start tackling it, let's take a look over into the home folder in the graphical user interface so that you see what it currently looks like. And also I will keep taking looks there once we do some changes to actually also see, the feedback of what happens on my operating system when I run this Python code. So this is my current home folder. You can see it's sitting on MacBook Pro. Macintosh today uses Martin. So I'm on a Mac and this is what my home folder looks like at the moment. See, there's just the standard folders in there and a cool secret stuff folder that we will not talk about any further. Okay, but if I will create a directory, it should pop up here and I should be able to see it also using the graphical user interface because I'm actually creating a folder. So let's start by doing that in Python from the REPL and then head back here and then actually see whether the folder shows up. In order to do this, I will need the pathlib module, and I'm going to import the path class from the pathlib module. Let's say from pathlib import path. You could also just import pathlib, but most of the time you'll just be using the path object, and it's a bit faster to write like that. Okay, so I need access to my home directory. So I'm going to define a variable that I'll call home, and I will use path.access home in order to let pathlib figure out what is my home directory. So this should work for you, whether you're on Linux, on macOS, or on Windows. It should give you back your home directory. There it is. It's users Martin, and because it says POSIX path, you can see that I'm on a Unix system. All right. So I have access to my home directory. Now, what I want to do in there is to create a folder called my_folder. All right. I will give that a variable too. I'm going to say my_folder is home and then my_folder. So that will be the path to my folder. Let's double check. How's it going? Okay, so we have the path. It's users Martin, my_folder. Now I also need to create it. And I can do that by saying my folder.mkdir, that stands for make directory. It's a method that I need to call. So I put the parentheses, press enter, and that should be it. Now, Python doesn't give me any feedback whether or not this folder was created or not. And there's ways I can check it with Python. I can say my folder.exists, and it's true. So we got a good chance that it's actually there. But let's check it out also with using the graphical user interface. Heading back to my Finder here, I can see that now I have a folder called my_folder that sits at my home directory. Yippee! That worked out. Moving on to the next task. With the folder created, my next task is to create 3 files inside of that folder and call them file1, 2, and image.png. First 2 are txt files, the third one is a png file. Okay, so I already have access to my folder. So I know I can create paths to the files, create the path objects first, and then also make them. I have file1, and that'll be my folder, and then the name, file1, .txt, there you go. And to actually create it, I'm gonna need to say touch. Again, Python doesn't give me any feedback, so let's head back over to the graphical user interface to see whether the file's there. So I'll navigate inside of my folder, and here it is, file1.txt. Great. Let's make the other ones. And just for fun, let's riff on this a little. This is probably the most clean way to create this file. Like first you create the path and then you call a touch on it. But you can also like mix it up a little. So for example, I don't really need to create the variable for file2, let's say, but I can just directly create it. I could say my folder and then file2.txt. So this part is going to create the path object that points to file2.txt. And then I'll just directly call touch on it. When I execute this, I essentially just did the same thing that I did here, but without the intermediate step of using a variable for it. Back over to the graphical user interface. Yep, file2.txt is also here. And then just to play around a little more, I'm going to use another way to create the third one. I'm going to save my folder.joinPath and then image1.png. And if you remember, .joinPath is just the same as using this slash operator on a path object and a string. So here, again, I'm just creating the path object the same way I did up here inside of these parentheses or up here with that operation that I assigned to a variable. And now again, I'm going to call touch on it. And this should have created image1.png, but let's take a look. And here it is. And you can see also the first 2 are txt files and the third one is a png file. We just created these 3 files, and I used 3 slightly different approaches to do it. There's none that is inherently right or wrong, but I would argue that this first approach is probably the best one because it's the most readable. This one, if you know how these path objects work and you know you need to put it into parentheses here so that Python doesn't attempt to call .touch on the string, which would fail. Let's try it out. So if you do my folder test txt and then say .touch like that, you see, then Python is going to think that you want to call .touch on the string. And this is not going to work out because string object has no attribute touch. So you need to first create the path object, which is why I use parentheses here. And I would say this is not the most readable, so it's probably not an ideal way to solve this. That's why I think like using .join path in a situation like that makes a bit more sense, because you can more clearly see that you're just chaining another method call to .join path, which returns this path object. Okay, but different ways of doing it. None of them is wrong, but again, I would argue that probably the first one is the best one because it's the most readable one. That's it about creating the 3 files. All right, next lesson, next step. Here we are with the next task. Move the file image1.png to a new directory called images inside of the my folder directory. I will need to create a new directory and call it images, and then move the file image1.png. If I'd be writing this inside of a script, I would be doing similar things to here, that I'm just making like little short code comments that help me keep track of what I'm supposed to do here. Now, this task actually has kind of like 2 steps. So let's break it up and say, make first a new directory called images inside there. Yeah, okay. So I can say like that. A is create a new directory called images. Then the next task is going to be to move the file to this new directory. Move the file to this new directory. Okay, these are my 2 tasks. And let's start with A. Create a new directory called images inside of the my folder directory. Similar to what you did before, I'm going to say images there. It's going to be my folder. I often try to press the tab character to autocomplete a variable that I'm writing. Most modern code editors have this, or you can install some sort of extension to do it for you. And that's just very helpful because it avoids making a typo, or maybe you don't exactly know what the variable is called, and then you can just cycle through it by pressing the tab character. Here in the idle REPL, you see like sometimes it brings up this little box if I didn't give it enough. Let me see. Yeah, here you go. Because there's multiple possible matches. So if I just say M, you can cycle through them like this. And then in case I find my folder is what I'm looking for, I can press enter. But if you write more characters, then it'll autocomplete right away. Little detour. Okay, let's keep going. My folder, and then I want a new directory that should be called images. And then I'm going to say images.mkdir. Then we're at B. Move the file image.1png to the new directory. I will need the path of image1. Image1 was in my folder, and then image1.png. So double check whether this looks correct. Use a smart in my folder image1.png. Cool. Let's just check whether it exists, that I didn't mistype anything, because remember, you can create paths even if the file doesn't exist. But looks good. The file is there. And now I want to move it. So I'm going to first have to define the destination where I want to move it to. So we'll say destination is my folder. Oh, wait, actually, I already have images there. So images, there it is. And then I'll just call it the same, image1.png. So that's my destination where I want to move it to. Let's check that one out too. All right, images, image1.png. Looks like this is the path where I need to move it. Let's also check here, does this one exist? Destination.exists. It doesn't exist yet. Sweet. So I'm going to say image1.replace and put it over there in the destination path. Now here you can see that pathlib actually returns something. So there's a bit of feedback if you want. It gives you back the path object that points to the new destination of the file. So where you just move it. Which means that if I'm now going to say destination.exists, we'll get it true. Okay, but again, I still don't entirely trust my command line, so I want to go over to the graphical user interface and check whether it's actually there and moved. Okay, you can see there's already a space, a gaping hole where image1.png used to be, but we have an images folder, and inside of images, there's image1.png. So the move worked out perfectly. Let's see what the next task is. I just, again, cleared the screen and did the imports again so that we have a bit more screen real estate to work with. The next task is to delete the file, file1.txt. We can do that, right? Where is file1.txt again? I will just start by listing the contents of my folder. And for this, I can use iter and put it into the list function just to display the results. Okay, so I have file2, file1. All right, so it's in here. I do have file1 in here, and I want to get rid of it. So first, I will need the path, this path. I need to get it. Probably the most readable way to get the path to file1.txt in here is going to be to say file1 equals my folder, and then file1.txt. And that should be the same path as we have here on position 1. Let's double check with having a little fun with Python on the side. So I'm going to say list my folder editor, and I want the second element in here. We copy that and see whether we're getting the right result. Yeah, that's file1.txt. And I can also compare whether it's the same to file1. And we got the right path. Okay, perfect. So file1 points to a file that exists inside of my folder. Now I want to delete this, and I can do it by saying file1.unlink. Again, Python doesn't really give me a feedback here whether or not this worked. You'll see that if I run it and the file doesn't exist, it actually gives me feedback and tells me that this file doesn't exist. So by not giving us feedback here, we know that it should have worked out. Let's double check though by doing the list my folder editor again. And there it is. It's gone, not here anymore. And of course, we want to go double check in the graphical user interface again. So if I head over here and go back to my folder, now there's another gaping hole where file1.txt used to be. So we successfully deleted it. Awesome. We're approaching the end of those exercises. The next one is already number 5. Let's tackle it in the next lesson. Okay, last exercise. Let's look at that one. Delete the my folder directory. So the last task is to get rid of all the hard work that you just did and put your home folder back into its original state, which means we want to delete my folder and anything that's inside of my folder. So pathlib doesn't actually allow you to do this. One way to delete my folder would be to go over all the files that are inside the my folder directory or its subdirectory images and first delete the files and then remove the empty folders. But you can also use shutil to delete folders that have a content in them. Now you want to be careful with this, right? Be careful. Because you don't want to accidentally delete a folder that contains important stuff. So make sure that you're deleting the right folders if you're using this. Okay, I'm going to import shutil. Then I want to use the rm-tree method. This stands for remove tree. But before I do this, like I said, I want to be careful. So let's double check that my folder is actually what I expect it to be. Use a smart in my folder. That path looks good. See what's in there. Okay, looks good. File2.txt. I know these are empty. Some DS store file that macOS creates, and then an images folder. Now, okay, so what's inside of that images folder? Did I maybe like accidentally move a really important image in there? Just to make sure, I want to also list everything that's in there. And for this, you can use rglob. And then again, I'm passing the results, the object that gets generated from rglob to the list function so that we can see an output here. I have file2.txt, this DS store file, then the folder images, and it only contains one file. It's called image1.png. Okay, that's also just the thing that we created before. Now I feel confident that I can actually delete this directory. So I'm going to say shutil.rm-tree and then pass in the path, which is my folder. And after this, then my folder should not exist anymore. And it is gone. And with it, everything that was in there. Let's check it out in the graphical user interface. So if I go back here to my home directory, you can see that the my folder that used to hang out over here is gone. And my home directory is back to its original state. And that finishes these 5 quick review exercises. You created directories and files, moved the file around, and also deleted files and directories. Along the way, you practiced a couple of skills. Here's a quick recap of the tips that you might have agglomerated while going over these past couple of lessons. You use the idle REPL, which is a read, evaluate, print loop of a program that comes with installing Python called idle. You could have also used another Python interpreter, the one of your choice, and it should give you a similar response. So it's just about being inside of a read, evaluate, print loop where once you type a command, it gets executed right away. You added tasks as comments in there. So you somewhat treated your REPL session as a file where you could also take comments just to sort your brains and know what is the task that you're going to work on next. Then you did tackle one task at a time. So by just copying over the instructions, you just took a look and were like, okay, so this is what I'm going to focus on next, and then completed that before moving on to the next task. There was even a time when you split up a task into 2 subtasks. So don't get too stuck with an instruction when it's there. If you see that it's maybe 2 instructions in one, then you can still split it up, and making them as granular as possible is going to make it much easier for you to manage to tackle it. Then you also check the effects of the code that you wrote in your graphical user interface by swapping over to your Finder or Explorer and just see what happened on your computer through a different lens, so to say, not just through the code that you write, where you also did some checks with .exists, for example, but also by looking directly into the graphical user interface, see a folder pop up, see a file pop up, and then see them vanish again. Finally, you also double check before executing potentially damaging commands. So it's something to keep in mind that the code that you're writing here can cause damage because you're interacting with your file system. And if you delete a file there, it's gone. So before you went to delete a folder that also contained files, you just made sure that it is actually the resource that you want to delete before running this potentially damaging and harmful operation. So just a heads up, always keep in mind that if you aren't careful with some of this code, you can actually cause damage. And that's important both for yourself as well as for programs that you might write that would run on other people's computers. Always keep in mind that your program is a guest on another person's computer, so you definitely don't want to cause any damage there.